Hello, everyone. I'm Soo Hugh, and I have the privilege today of speaking with Veena. And I don't know if most of you probably don't know this, but Veena gave me my first job in television, and she staffed me as a staff writer on The Killing. So I feel like I'm very much sitting here because of Veena. So it's just such a great, really great privilege and honor to be here. So for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure all of you know who Veena is because you guys signed up, but she really is one of the pioneers, I think, for women showrunners, which is sad that we even have to make that disclaimer, but she really is. I mean, her career has spanned almost 20 years now, and she has created 3 shows, written and directed movies, televisions, short forms, just the whole gamut. Uh, she really has done it all. So I'm just impressed that she has the energy to keep going. It sounds exhausting, which is one of the questions I would love to ask her later. But Veena, hello. Thank you for doing this.
And thank you. And what a pleasure. And it's such a great reunion to see each other again and to do this together. And congratulations to you for all your incredible success. It is all yours, Sue. It's absolutely all yours. So
Well, one of the things I do want to say that you are, and I would love to talk about this later, but Veena is someone who very much believes in the mentorship of writers and pushing writers up the chain, bringing writers to set. So for a staff writer to be on set on my first production, I mean, Veena, you taught so many writers how to show run, and I've heard that from so many people. So that giving back has been so generous. Um,
I mean, I learned that from my first boss, Meredith Steen. I was a first year baby writer on her show Cold Case. That was my first job as a TV writer. And Meredith, came from the school, and I know it's changing now. And I think it's unfortunate where we learn basically our entire craft from page to broadcast. And so that meant, that we all got to learn how to translate and be part of the process on set, which is a whole other ballgame and quite difficult, on every level as we all experience, as especially as baby writers going on set. And it's such an essential experience.
well, so then was Cold Case your first paycheck?
Technically, my first paycheck as a writer, the very first time I actually got paid to do anything in television was as a Disney fellow. So I came out here and I am such a fan of these programs. The Disney Fellowship, is specifically for underrepresented writers, and this is 20 years ago, and it continues to be the case today. Writers of color, women writers, and that a fellowship basically paid us as aspiring writers and directors to for a year. So we got a paycheck for a year, and we got time. We met with industry people every week. We all wrote scripts. We were able to form ideas. Living, I was not living in Los Angeles at the time. I had to move here for the fellowship, and it was invaluable. The experience of not 2 weeks or 3 days or 7 days, but an entire year where I got to absorb the industry and learn. And they did try to staff you as well. So because you were on payroll, you were technically paid, and you could go on as a intern is the incorrect word, but as a fellow, a Disney fellow onto ABC television shows at the time. And that is where I got put on Push Nevada as my first time in a writer's room. And that was an incredible experience.
So in the game of sliding doors, if you had not gone the Disney Fellowship, would you have moved to LA?
Absolutely not. I didn't want to move to LA. My family was in on the East Coast. My son, I was raising my son at that time. He was 11. I could not move myself without a concrete opportunity that promised potential employment. So I couldn't. I hear so many stories of people getting in their car and driving across country. I couldn't. I was a single parent. I had to earn money and support my son. So the Disney Fellowship gave me the opportunity to do that.
There's just like so much to unpack in what you just said, because like the first of all, you were a mother. just to make that choice to move out is such there's so many systemic barriers to that. And so many, I think, of our audiences have those same situations. For people who are dealing with personal barriers to making their dreams happen, what are some other opportunities do you think there are to help get people that first writer's paycheck?
There aren't a lot, right? I mean, again, Disney gave me not a promise that I would have a job beyond a year, but I needed that year. I could not uproot a child from school for 6 weeks. I couldn't. I mean, coming to Los Angeles, it's different now. I think a little bit in the industry since production is in other cities besides LA. This year. This was 2002, and but what it gave me, long-term fellowships, I think, give people time and some sort of safety net, so you aren't working simultaneously while you're trying to write and trying to do a million things to get into the industry. But it's a tough industry to get into. It was then, it continues to be today, and especially for people who have real life going on simultaneously, children, families, helping parents, all of that stuff. There needs to be more, I think, thoughtful support around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of your foundational positions was on Cold Case. How did you get that job? And I would love to talk about broadcast television because I feel the sheen has come off broadcast television. I started off, like after The Killing, I went to broadcast television. And I always tell people, like, don't discount broadcast.
Hmm.
So how did you get to Cold Case and what was that experience for you?
So the experience, it was, thank you for saying sliding doors, because one thing kind of begat the other. So when I was a Disney fellowship, they were trying to place us on shows because, as many people know, unless you are on a show, it's really hard to get representation. But unless you have representation, it's really hard to be on a show. So they were able to kind of break through that catch 22 and put me, again, super low stakes. I was not a paid writer on Push Nevada. I was a Disney fellow. My salary was being paid by Disney, and at a far deeper discount than a writer's salary. But when that show closed, and I learned so many lessons on that show, I did have an agent at that point, because the irony is, of course, before I was a Disney fellow, before I got on Push, I'd been writing agents and saying, here's my, Oz spec, I want to be a TV writer, never a response. And the minute I got put on the show, everyone all of a sudden is like bringing me out to eat and to bars and whatnot. It was weird. So I did sign at the time with UTA, and when Push Nevada ended, my agent at the time, Dan Ehrlich, said, have your samples ready. But a lot of people now are reading short stories. And again, this was 2002. So I wrote a short story. I spent the next month prior to staffing season, which then was a very specific time in the spring for broadcast for network shows. And the short story went out, and Meredith Steen read it. She was staffing for her show Cold Case, and she told me, many months later, after I was working for her, and we became friends, that her partner at the time, Tom, read it and was just like, you have to read this short story, it's so dark. It was about a woman who gets trapped inside the bathroom of her apartment, and there's no windows, no doors. She's an addict, she's an alcoholic, and it's about the next 12 hours she spends going insane because she can't use her drug, and confronting all her demons. So super dark. Meredith liked it, and that was how I got my first job.
And I actually didn't know that you got staffed off a short story. So you never submitted a screenplay for that job.
Well, they did want a screenplay because they wanted to make sure that I could actually write in screenplay format, and I wasn't just a fiction writer. So I did. I had a procedural that would be, a good fit for Cold Case. I think it was a Law and Order procedural, and that I submitted that because, obviously the showrunner Meredith needed to know that I could write in script form.
And you had one of those dreams come true scenarios where you actually stayed on a show for more than a year or 2. How? Because it just seems like that never happens nowadays with these short order forms, short order episodes. But how long were you on Cold Case for?
So I was on Cold Case for a total of 5 years, which, yes, is, few and far between these days. I loved working for Meredith. I count myself extraordinarily lucky, very lucky, to not only have a female showrunner who treated me like a writer, and not like a liability or a diversity hire or a charity case or the one woman in the room. There were many women in the room, which again was extremely rare in early 2000s to have that a female heavy room on a cop show. But Meredith was also an incredible role model. She was fair. She expected the best from all of us. And for me as a woman who aspired to be a showrunner one day and create my own work, she was an incredible, her strength, she was very young when she created Cold Case. And for me to be able to watch her not only deliver scripts on time on a mega hit, which the show became, but to also be able to deal with all the politics above and below on set and in the executive suite was a true gift.
You and I were really fortunate, and it just seems luck is a huge part of it, to have worked for showrunners who are respectful and kind and just wanted to give back. So many friends that I have who come with the system talk about showrunners who really made them want to quit the business. Like, if you had, again, a lot of these are sliding doors questions. Like, what do you say to people who don't have the best experience and who've had it's such a big part of whether or not people are inspired to write is whether or not they're on a show that they respect the people they work with.
Yeah.
And more, I feel like this behavior is coming out, but we keep hearing about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's unacceptable. And my hope is that, and I have seen that aspect of the industry changing, thankfully, because of different social movements around that, like Me Too. And I feel that, look, at the end of the day, this is a tough industry. It's tough all around. It's terrible. And you're constantly in some sort of group situation, whether it's on the set, with actors and crew or in the room, or when you create your own show, dealing with executives. And so, and selling and pitching and convincing. A very good friend of mine said a really brilliant thing once when I was just exhausted and beaten down and not wanting to fight anymore. And part of me wanted to quit. And she said, "You're not allowed to quit. You're not allowed to quit. You have something to say it. Just push the ball down the field as far as you can. Know that this is an unjust world and this is a sexist, racist industry, and just keep going." So that's what I say to every writer out there, especially especially writers of color, especially female writers. Don't let them run you out. This is your place, this is your turn to tell your story. Keep going and just get a lot of massage, like just do something to take care of yourself. That is essential. But yeah.
I feel like you put that into your shows because both The Killing and 8 Seconds, I feel like I remember that speech. Um, you know,
Really? Okay, that's awesome.
you're
Thank
not allowed to quit. I always thought, it's always like every time you hear it, your spine, like, you're not allowed to quit. Get yourself up. And because I think in
you.
8 seconds,
Yes.
that's, yeah,
Yeah, in 7 seconds, the partner, the detective says to KJ, "You're not allowed to quit."
yeah.
And thanks to my friend Nadia, that line is in the show.
So let's talk about The Killing because was that your first pilot that you created a show after Cold Case?
It was, yes, that was my first show, and it was based on a Danish format called Forbedelsen, and it was an extraordinary. I mean, Nordic noir is an extraordinary kind of type of storytelling, that I was drawn to immediately. So when I left Cold Case, Meredith was very, again, an incredible showrunner, a great role model, and also she gave me the opportunity to run the show, which that skill set, as you know, is so important to just kind of keep your head above water as you're doing your own work. And so I came out of 2 years of running Cold Case very much wanting to create a cable show. And so I went out and I started pitching different ideas. And my agent at the time at CAA said, "There's this format, it's called The Killing. Would you like to see it?" And I was just like, hell yeah, I want to see it. Like that title in and of itself makes me want to make it. And I wasn't disappointed. It was an extraordinary, and it is an extraordinary Danish TV show.
I remember when I read the pilot, because that was my first staffing season, and it just it felt so different from every other pilot I'd read. It felt like a movie, and TV people get very mad, I feel, and I think that's a compliment, but there was something so cinematic and epic about that tragedy of the murder and the ramifications in that pilot episode. How This is just a very simple, perhaps naive question, but how did you learn how to write that way? Like, was it just did Cold Case teach you? Was it just a natural gift? Like, where did that kind of language come from?
I think it came from a lot of different places, but I definitely want to credit directing, because I think what directing does is it forces you to see what's possible visually, and then forces you to think about composition and to think about how characters move. And again, I was very lucky. The pilot was directed by Patty Jenkins, the great Patty Jenkins. And we were able to, it was also premiered on AMC, which had been very dedicated to kind of cinematic storytelling as their brand, when they were very new on the scene with Mad Men and Breaking Bad. And so the idea of a very rich visual palette to tell this story was absolutely kind of the starting point for The Killing. And it's always been my instinct. I went to directing school, I went to NYU in the directing program, and we did write our own material. But, and so in many ways, I definitely consider myself a writer director. But because I went through the discipline of just looking constantly and thinking of stories in terms of looking, one thing do you remember when we were doing The Killing first year and we were like, let's make every teaser an MOS film?
Yeah,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
she used to make films, Rosie Larson, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And so much of that came from you, Sue. Because remember, what was that young artist? The
Oh my God, Olivia B. She's blown up, by the way. She's huge now. We should have bought her work then.
amazing. But yeah, so Rosie was the filmmaker on The Killing, making her own, tiny little films on film. But at NYU, what we did was we did short films, and the first year films were without any dialogue, without anything except the visual storytelling. Tell a 5-minute compelling story just with pictures, and we were doing that on The Killing season 1, and that was actually really fun and lovely, to set the table of what was going to come per episode.
So I mean, in that transition, melding the director brain and the writer brain, do you feel like going forward you only want to write and direct your stuff, or would you ever direct have you ever directed other people's scripts? Like how does those two brains work for you?
I haven't. I would love. Oh no, I'm sorry. I did. I directed Nate's episode on The Killing. I think it was season 3 or season 2. So season 2, I had never done TV directing before, and I did want to try it. And so it was tough, right? Because when you're show running, then you've got 2 million things going on, and then all of a sudden now you can't do anything except direct, for I don't know what it was, 8 days. So it was an effort to get all the stuff kind of organized so that I could just go on set and not have to like be looking at dailies on something else, or cuts or scripts. And it was really fun. I mean, it was lovely. You know, Nate's a great writer, and I really enjoyed directing it. But it is a different. We writers are visual by nature, right? Because we are creating worlds. But I think the challenge is to always think of, maybe even before you write a scene, how could I write this scene without violence?
Mhm.
Is it possible for me to convey through action, behavior, composition, editing of visuals, the same material? And if I can, do some of that, or if I can't, then where can I? I think that goes a long way in terms of creating that cinematic voyage, and also goes a long way in giving actors rich material to play.
And so how do you determine whether something you're writing, you want to do it as a TV show, as a feature?
I think the material tells you, right? Like, if something has a life that goes beyond 90 minutes, and a journey for one character, or I think for me, the sweet spot with TV shows is there's a possibility for an ensemble. So
Mhm.
there's at least two characters with compelling stories that don't necessarily have to be together all the time. Three is ideal, three worlds that can interweave. Um, with a feature, absolutely not. No, it's one. It's You have 90 minutes. You got one person's story to tell. At least that's how I do it.
And I just realized the Killing 7 Seconds, and now Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, which we'll get to, they're all adaptations. Do you prefer adaptations?
Well, I like I really enjoyed adapting The Killing because the material was so, as we all know, we watched the original. Is so smart and so good. And yes, we veered away from it, from some of the original ideas because they didn't work, I think, in the American context, or um, I wanted to do different things. So season 2, 3, and 4 were not based on the Danish. 7 Seconds was actually, so it was a little bit frustrating because I was developing. It was my first development deal at the time, and I was looking at material that Fox FTVS was what had optioned, and one of them was a Russian film about a cop who runs over a boy on the road and then goes on to torture his entire. It's just very corrupt cop doing crazy shit. Um, but it was so hyper violent, and it was so Tarantino, and it was absolutely not my taste.
I would never have guessed that from watching 7 Seconds.
Right, exactly. And but what I told my executive at the time, I said, if we can talk about police violence in America, because this show will move to America, all the shootings, so many shootings were happening that summer. It was insane. Like, you turn on the TV and some black man is getting shot in his back on television. I said, well, we have to talk about this, and we have to talk about it this way. It's going to be very different from the movie, because the movie was told mostly from, I think, all from the cop's point of view, and it was a bit action adventure. This will be more about the family. This will be about the young African American DA who gets the case, and about the white cops who are trying to cover up the crime. So it'll be more ensemble. It'll be very different. So it was very different. It was, the initial inspiration was the Russian film, but immediately within seconds it veered away from that. And then what was the other one? The other, was it? I think you mentioned
Well,
it.
we're doing Girl with a Dragon Tattoo
Or the
for
Giant is
Amazon.
an adaptation. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm sure there's lots of questions about that one. We'll get to that. I remember, especially the Killing, 7 Seconds, and even Stranger, your film. Well, I don't even know what to call it, and we'll get to that as well. Like, you are so brilliant at final images. Like, when I think about the boom shot from the blood to the Statue of Liberty, and in Stranger, like her walking towards the camera and like you reveal the wolves. Like, Do you write that knowing when does that come to you in the script writing process? Because it really does land the punch.
Mm. I think it goes back a lot to the earlier bit we were talking about in terms of directing. Because again, if you know what is physically possible for a camera to do, then you know what you can put in your frame and have land, versus theoretically something is happening internally with the actor, or there's, America's land of the free supposedly, but it's really not. And but like, okay, great, wonderful idea, sounds good on the page, but I have to see it. So I knew, because I lived on the East Coast and I lived in Jersey City for many years, that you can see the Statue of Liberty in this achingly bizarre way from that particular park that's in Jersey City,
Oh,
where the crime takes place. So I knew if we put it there, we had to fictionalize some things. Like we created that giant snow hill, so she has to walk up, and then you reveal the Statue of Liberty, and then you can see from in a high angle, blood and all of that stuff in the same frame. But I think it is that knowing kind of the physicality of the worlds that you're creating, and again, what cameras can do. And it's not
uh,
even complicated, like what can you put in a frame? You don't even have to think about lenses or anything. Helps kind of come up with a very final, clear image and communicate it, to whomever is working on the show.
the images tend to be both powerful, poignant, and bleak in the same breath. I mean, your shows and your characters are such punctured souls. They leak so many emotions. What what does it do to you to live in that world and with those characters for so long? Like, do you walk around with the cloud over your head all the time? Like it's a lot.
It's a lot. I remember when we were all of us together, went to meet the parents whose children who had lost their children. So season one of The Killing, so that we could tell their stories. And I had met with them prior when I wrote the pilot, and I'm a parent, you're a parent, and feeling the weight of the agony that these folks went through and continue to go through. Um, and I think that part of the responsibility of a writer is when we take on an idea or we take on a scenario, that we know it enough that we can be honest about it, and not, especially in terms of um, someone's child. As a parent, it's really important to me that those stories be told in a way that is truthful and respectful and doesn't turn it into murder porn, and doesn't sexualize young women who are murdered. And I rage and I grieve every time I see that. Um, and unfortunately, there's quite a lot of it, and it continues to be a lot of sexualization of murdered women, and it's so disturbing to me, and so alarming that critics and other people in our industry applaud that type of exploitation.
We talked about this before, but true crime is hot in Hollywood right now. It sells, the audiences are there, the ratings are big. Um, and cynically, some of the more prurient stuff tends to rise to the top in terms of making noise with the audience. How do you resist that urge? Like, you know, how do you resist that urge not to fall in that trap?
I just don't find it interesting. I find it gross. And when we create things, we live with them for a really long time. It's not 2 days, 3 days, a year, it's years. And they stay with us, and we go to sleep with them, and we drive down the road with them, and we eat dinner with them, and I'm not interested, in that. That is not interesting to me. Um, and so in some ways it's a very simple and easy way to not do it. Is just, I just don't find it interesting, and I don't want to spend my time there. um,
Well, something you do spend time is sort of questioning form and breaking new grounds. So you worked with Quibi, and I think some people may not even remember know Quibi. Do you want to explain what Quibi is, was, and your show?
Yes. So, in a nutshell, Quibi was this extraordinarily ambitious idea that we will be looking at material in a vertical form. At some point, all of us are walking around with these things and we're always looking at them. So, Jeffrey Katzenberg said, let's create material that we can actually watch on a vertical screen in the same way we consume other things on these phones. And so that meant short form. So each episode of each show would be 10 minutes. It would be limited. So I think there were 13 episodes per series, per season. So 130 minutes total, 13, times 10. And the bigger question, and what was so interesting to me, and I think to a lot of people who signed on, was how do I tell a story vertically in a way that doesn't feel I'm missing out visually? So we are used to horizontal screens, landscape screens when we watch television and go to the movies. Our eyes are horizontal, so we naturally need to see in a very kind of specific horizontal way. That's why the screens look the way they do. And so it's XY, right? That's fills a frame. And so what I had to think about was, what about if it's AZ? What if we just start playing with depth, in a way that we haven't, and in a way that forces us to constantly feel like we're finding new information? Because if you were to shoot a conversation like we're having on a vertical form, it would just get boring after a while, right? It'd just be two faces kind of talking at each other. I wouldn't be able to see your background. You wouldn't see my background. There'd be nothing novel or interesting. And after a while, you would just drop out. So what I did, the palette itself of the vertical format on Quibi created the story. And that was the first time I'd ever done that. Usually the story comes and I think about it and then I go and, sell it. But the idea of a vertical frame is what started to make me think, what is the thing that we do to go from A to Z physically? Cameras behind someone. We did that a lot on The Killing. I think Dan Attias started out like just following Mireille and the ponytail shot, we would call it. But that's what I started to use, the idea of the following the actor, throughout Los Angeles as she's on the run from an insane passenger that she picked up earlier that night. So there was a built-in inherent kind of propulsion to the story that I think benefited it as a film, certainly, which it is now, but back in the day was absolutely necessary for the vertical screen to feel like exciting and interesting. So we pushed things together really tightly inside the screen. My DP and my production designer and I constantly were thinking about how to put things in the screen and what natural environments have material that can be in a vertical screen. So a train car, the seats are this close, the light is like this. You can get this feeling of movement as the character's running through the train. Gas station, candy aisles, push them close. Chinatown, you've got the big, beautiful lanterns. Union Station, you've got kind of like the architecture of the ceiling that you can look at if you like angle up a little bit and follow and track the characters. So that a lot of that says move through a city that's interesting and have a reason that you're moving this much. And that's where the story came from.
And how long, like, are you writing all 13 episodes at the same time, or did you have a writer's room for Quibi?
No, I mean, it was 130 minutes. I mean, 113 times 10, 130 minutes. So there was no need for anything except me to write it, I mean, it's a feature film essentially. And so when Jeffrey said, and this was appealing thing number two, you will own copyright, after 2 years, the rights will revert to you and you can do whatever you want with it. That automatically made me start thinking, what comes next? After Quibi, what can come next for this project? And I knew I couldn't sell a 10-minute episodic television show, but I could sell a feature film. And so I wrote as a feature with 10-minute, act breaks that could be episodic outs. And it oddly, felt very natural when I laid it all out. And The one thing though, my editor and I found very quickly when he was editing it and I was in the room with him when we were turning it into a feature that's on Hulu now, um, it was very stop and start by design because you have to end the episode after 10 minutes and get out with enough of a cliffhanger that the audience is going to come back. Um, and so we just had to smooth out kind of those in between moments between 10-minute chunks.
It's okay. I find this really just mind-blowing. You, when you started Stranger, you knew that it was going to air in 10-minute chunks
Mhm.
on a vertical platform, but you also knew that eventually, because you're going to get the copyright back, that you were then going to, you knew this from the very beginning that you're going to make it into a feature.
I did because I mean, I think that's the beauty of owning copyright. Like you think you're able to think adventurously. And I think that's what Jeffrey knew, right? Is this is a big gamble. We're asking you to devote a ton of your time to something that may not work. But it's okay because you will own it and you can do whatever you want. And so I was very happy, to be able to try and play on in that kind of new artistic landscape. But I also knew there's a safety of 2 years from here on out, I can take the material back. And again, there's, the story itself lent it to becoming a feature. If it was, a one day something, if it was different, some of the quibby content was different. It wasn't connected in the way mine was. It'd be very hard to turn that into a feature.
And when you say copyright, and this may be a stupid question, I actually don't quite know what that means. Meaning you own the footage, you own the story idea, you own all of it.
Yeah, so technically it is owned 50-50. So I own 50% and the studio owns 50%. And so, but the studio, which is Disney, it used to be, Fox back in the day and FTDS, they're on board. Jane Francis, who was my executive during the project, is wonderful. And she's just like, yes, what else can we do? Let's see if Hulu's interested. And so, uh, yeah, I mean, copyright just means you own it, and you can do whatever you want with it, as long as your partner is willing. But it's just ownership.
I mean, but it's revolutionary because it's no longer the idea of networks and studios having a library. Writers have a library of their own work.
Yeah, and this has been a stop and start movement kind of through the history of our industry, from starting with Zoetrope and Coppola. But I feel that it has allowed this project not to die. It has allowed me to then bring it back. And who better, who cares the most, about the work than the creator. Um, so I'm so grateful that that was baked in because it did allow me to walk away with a feature film that I'm really excited about.
And now you're working with another behemoth with Amazon and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And I know we can't talk too much about it, but it has already become such an iconic crime book. I mean, in terms of like the canon of crime, does it intimidate you to take on something like that? It's been adapted a few times. Like, how do you approach works like that?
I think the only thing we can do is find what is interesting to us about something, about an adaptation. Like what sings to you, what stirs you, what moves you. Who is the girl with the dragon tattoo today? That she wasn't. No, I mean in 2010, very different person. When the novels were written, very specific person. Um, so it was just part of it is just it's this beautiful challenge to think of creating an angry young woman of today, and what that.
And are you doing a writer's room? Are you doing that process?
Yeah, yeah, doing the whole process, the whole traditional process.
When you hire writers for your rooms, like how do you hire? Like, are you looking for writers who write in the same tone of the show? Are you reading short stories like when you broke out? How do you approach it?
Yeah, I mean, I usually love to read shorts. I've always been a fan of that or one act plays. It allows you to see an essence, I think, sometimes that um, an essence of character. I think that sometimes may be hard to get from a screenplay because it is such a visual medium. Fiction isn't, and nor are plays. And they rely very much on facility of language and also on who the people are and their internal journeys. So I find that very instructive and helpful to read that. And then I'll have to read, if I'm interested in that writer, we have a good meeting, then I actually have to read their screenplay formats to make sure that, again, they can just technically do what we do. But I think for me, it is very much about the world that I'm creating. So who understands this world? Who is this specific character? Who can speak to, um, you know, an undercover detective? Who can speak to a politician? Who understands those characters? And sometimes it's not the voice. The person who has the voice, a lot of time, is not the person you would expect to have the voice, which is lovely to discover. But for me, it's a very wide ranging process. I take a lot of time. I read everything to the point I think sometimes where I annoy my executives. But I love to read. I love to read new writers. I especially love baby writers. So it's a very long process.
When you think about how you staff The Killing, and now that was roughly 15 years ago.
That was in 20. We staffed in 2010.
Oh yeah, okay. And then now, has anything changed in styles of the scripts you're reading? Does anything feel different staffing now than it did 14 years ago?
Uh, what's different? No, I mean, I feel like it's at the end of the day. Meredith said it to me really beautifully when she asked me to run Cold Case, and she was helping me learn how to do it. I got to spend, just sit with her, and I was, hemming and hawing about something, and she was just like, "It's good writing or it's not." It's that simple. Like it either speaks to you or it doesn't. And so I think at the end of the day, that's what I look for is, and it's so subjective, to one person, me, but that's at the end of the day, the only thing I care.
What's interesting about this conversation is just how wide ranging what duties are for a showrunner, especially the way you approach it, right? Like writing is actually taken up maybe half of our conversation. Writing, production, editing. Do you have a favorite part of the process?
I definitely, it's changed over time. So, and I'm curious too, like if you do, because I think different personalities, right? We like different things and at different stages of life, depending. For me, initially, loved the room, loved post, did not like set at all. And I think that's true for probably a lot of writers. I grew to love set the more I directed, you know. And I've always loved the craft people of set. I've always loved them. Um, but the whole experience, I think, especially for new writers and writers like running their first show, it can be intimidating. It can be a very intimidating place to be on a set with like 150 people milling about. But I love
And
it.
do you find, so you went to film school, did that help you get the production language? Because so many writers say, like, I don't know production, I feel intimidated. And people, writers talk about imposter syndrome on set. How do you get over that?
I think it did help me absolutely. Like I know I went to film school. I know how to shoot. I've picked up a camera and shot. I've been in cut on a steam back. So I know how to talk to people so that they understand. I can communicate what it is that they need to know for what they're doing. Versus just I give them some theoretical monologue and they have no idea what I want. Close up. What do you want? 40. Like so. I would just say for writers, especially now when we're not going through the merit esteem school anymore of writing, producing, editing, the whole gamut. I think that's a loss for writers. Um, Go take a class, go take a sight and sound class. They call it sight and sound at NYU, where you go and you shoot for 6 weeks. I'm sure there's a corollary here at UCLA or UCLA or USC, where just be a director for 6 weeks. You don't have to do it forever, but just learn the craft. That will help you immeasurably. You've directed, right? So,
I haven't formally directed. I'm getting ready to direct my first feature, but I mean, I remember feeling like, and I went to film school as well, and I thought I knew production, but there's something about walking. I remember The Killing. It's so big. The scale from student films to then walking on that stage in Vancouver, there's hundreds of people and they're coming at you with questions, and you're just like, I just hope no one realizes that I know nothing right now. Um, and it's actually a magical feeling, I always say, like that fear of, I don't know. I always say, like, embrace what you don't know, because you get cynical at, I don't know if you feel like that in my age and where I am, you get so cynical about things that I really sort of, I don't know. I find that nostalgic, that moment in my life.
right, yeah. To like be intimidated by a set again. I mean, I guess it could always happen, right? Like when I directed my first feature, I was so scared walking onto that set. So we can always find ways to scare ourselves. But I'm
Yeah.
very excited that you're directing. I'm very, very excited.
Well, I could have so many questions that I didn't get to, but I see that there's a lot of questions on the chat. And I'd love to make sure we get to some of them. So the first question is, Veena, can you expand on how directing informs the words on the page, especially when the advice given is don't direct on the page? Have you ever gotten
Yes.
advice? Don't direct on the page.
I mean, I've heard things like, I mean, yes. So, cut to blank, close up of blank, blah, 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 blah. Unless it's essential to the story, it feels like you're telling the director what to do too much, versus you're creating an environment that the director then can play with, right? And so one example I bring up a lot, and I think it's a good example, and it combines my great love of the visual with the great love of research that I think is so critical to writing about everything, is we did this together. We went to the morgue together. I think the first week of The Killing. So I bring, as you know, my staff to the morgue. We do a lot of research the first few weeks, and in the morgue, we do the standard thing where you walk through and you see what's going on. And there was a room where some young man had been shot, and they took his clothing off, and he had fallen into the LA River or something, so his clothing was dripping, and you could hear the droplets falling on the cement, and you could just see this shirt. And I ended up thinking, oh my God, like the sound of that is so sad and says so much, and the visual of that, and it's not gratuitous, it tells a story. And so that's one scene I wrote in one of the episodes at the beginning, when Rosie, my least favorite bit is to have to show anything at the morgue, without, because that's a very fine line of not being gratuitous and murder porn. So, Ed Bianchi was directing that episode, and I had written in the drops of water, from her hair. And that's what we see. I wanted us, the audience, to see her as a little girl and a child and someone's child, and to see that hair, and to not be looking at the dead body, but to see who she was to somebody alive, with her hair kind of falling beautifully, off the table. And it was wet. She was found in a river. So if that helps in terms of clarifying, you as a writer will find things visually that you can then write into the scene, and then the director can shoot it however they want. Ed did it in such a beautiful way that I could not have predicted, and that's, I think, the great marriage, between a script that is giving visuals to a director who can then just go to town and play with it. And then the other thing I would say for writers is, And sometimes if you're not the showrunner, this is very difficult to write to. But if you are the showrunner, you have scripts that you know are coming down the pipeline from specific writers that you know write a certain way. So marrying that writer with a director who has a similar sensibility, or the content of that episode and the writer style with the director. So there's that, as well.
And we got another question about would love to hear your thoughts on the state of the business and the market contraction we're going through. Is there hope for an upswing for upcoming writers and creators?
That's a big question.
Good question. I know I was going to say that's
What do you think, Sue?
people will always love movies and TV, right? That's never going to go away.
I feel that we are in the great war right now between commerce and art. It's always been a war, but it's heightened because we're in the very death throes of the streaming wars with the victors and the losers. And so, I know everyone's trying to blame it on the strikes, but it's not the strikes. It is the inevitable byproduct of the streaming wars coming to an end. And so the contraction is there and it's inevitable. I think people, the good news is this, that golden age has elevated the IQ of the world around content. When I did The Killing, there's no way in hell anybody would read a subtitle. Now my aunt in Ohio is like watching Korean soap operas. It's the international kind of cosmopolitan high IQ that we all have as Americans and as world viewers of content is inspiring, which also means people will want and continue to want really good content. And satisfying the four quadrant kind of bullshit mandates that so many of the streamers now have is not going to cut it, and will not keep whoever wins on top of the heap. So I think our job is to continue to tell really good stories, sneak them in. And there's, I think the appetite has also created an appetite probably for some indie film love, so that's kind of the next place I'm kind of thinking about moving.
I agree. How do you deal with tough story problems? What are your top craft tips?
Tough story. Is there, okay, so there's many ways that things are just tough story. They're logically tough story. You're trying to make something work that is not working. Okay, I'm going to try to answer this because it's a bit of a broad question. Go on a walk.
Yeah.
I think you and I and all of us in the writers' room on The Killing, we said, and I know many writers have said this, the best ideas come on the way to the bathroom. I think that there is something that is at work all the time in us to try to solve things. And this might be very specific to mystery writing, but I have always found really good ideas will come when I'm trying not to think about them, or I'm walking to the bathroom, or I'm going on a walk. All of a sudden, all the filters will start kind of evaporate and things will come in. And then I'll come up with an idea and a solution that then somewhat works. And then I have to actually just like write it out and do all of that.
Do you watch other movies or shows when you're stuck ever, or do you avoid that?
I feel like it could become just a way that my subconscious gets lazy and I derive things from other material. No, I mean, what's interesting though? I think sometimes all of us will have, I don't know if you ever feel this way, but I'll be stuck somewhere and I'll have this mad impulse to watch some scene from a film like 200 years ago that I loved. And it has nothing to do with what I'm working on. And I'll be like, oh, I'm just depressed. I want to watch it. And I'll watch it. I just watched the scene in Rust and Bone. I was working on a problem this afternoon, and Marianne Cotillard has just had the best sex of her life, and she's sitting on this patio, and she's reclaiming her life after this huge tragedy of losing, parts of her body. And I didn't realize when I came back to the writing, I realized I was looking for something that wasn't about, you know, the story of Rust and Bone but that was an emotion. And I just needed to touch that emotion inside myself to find it for myself. So
Well,
follow your detours sometimes, like
yeah.
you have
Well,
to
what
make.
you just said, like, it's one of the reasons why I will always feel upbeat and hopeful about the industry is because you we have so many memories of movies and television that help us reach. I mean, there's so much vulnerability that we can't access that for some reason my favorite movies and shows do. Um, do you like writing?
No, no, it's too hard. It's so hard.
And I think,
You?
oh, when I read a question like that, to me, the real question is, why do I hate writing, right?
Mm,
Like, why do I not enjoy this? Why is this such a slog? Um, and just admitting sometimes helps. Like, oh my God, I hate this.
it does help. It does
Yeah.
help. I feel like there are moments I like it, right? There are moments where you're just like, oh my God. And you lose sense of self and hours pass and you're just in it and you're looking for the right thing and the right word. And it's so lovely. But those feel that getting there and exiting from there feel like the slog, you
Yeah.
know, way more time than that like little beautiful 2 seconds that you get. Yeah, I don't know. No, hard.
So like to start wrapping it up, because I think is that I'm trying to figure out what this is saying. You're still very young, so it's an early exercise, but if you had to think about your career and you had to think about all your shows and your movies and your works and sitting where you are now, like what is the thing that you most regret and what is the thing that you're like, oh, I did that right? Like what feels really right for you in terms of where you are now and what felt, ah, huh, I would have done that differently.
Really good question. By the way, I'm reading the chat things. They're hilarious. Yes, it is masochistic in many ways, right? Um, but that's a great question. So, what did I do right? I think I fought for what I knew was right for my show. You know, that's when I did things right, even in the face of everyone saying that actor is not the one. Put some lipstick on her, whatever. If I knew something was true inside myself, that was like the line in the sand. So I learned that from my stubborn mother. Um, what I didn't do that I am trying to do as much as possible from here on out till the day I die, if I'm so lucky to continue to work, is have fun and enjoy, you know? Like we are in such a privileged place. Yes, it's masochistic. Yes, it's really hard to write. Oh my God, I'm the luckiest person on the face of the earth that I get to do what I day in and day out. And it's brief and it's fleeting and just enjoy every moment. I look back at every show in the writer's room and edit on the set, and I want to continue to just be grateful, and enjoy it.
Oh my
Enjoy
God.
it.
I wish we could ask more, but how do you follow that up? Um, that's amazing. Well, I can't wait for Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And when I really say like you have taught me so much. It's astonishing. And you are going to teach more people for the next 20, 30 years, and they're going to be amazing writers and showrunners. So like it's a public service that you do. I'm serious. Thank you.
I'm so lucky. And I'm so excited to talk to you. And I can't wait to see your movie.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for being here. And you got to hear so much like you're so honest. Thank you.